I believe the reason my grandfather came to New Haven was because, like I said, his fellow Navy friends were coming to New Haven, and I believe they knew people in New Haven who had jobs at Sargent's. Sargent's is a very big company that makes locks, and so I believe that the wife of Mr. Sargent was from Florence, Italy, and of course could speak Italian, and somehow arranged for a lot of the southern Italians to come to New Haven. And so my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, came first and then sent for his wife and his daughter, who at that point maybe was 3 years old. And so in that trunk, which is not all that big, she brought 2 pretty big treasures and wrapped them in beautiful linens that she had made. The house on St. John Street that my father's family lived in, it was at 265 St. John. It belonged to my father's family for at least 100 years. My father and his 11 siblings were raised on the first floor, and my grandfather had a brother, and his brother married my grandmother's sister. And so there were 2 families living in that house. The aunt and uncle were on the second floor with their 13 children, I think, and the Polios on the first floor with 11 children. And if you saw the house, it's not very big. This particular table that I'm sitting at was my grandmother and grandfather's table all those years. And one day we figured out my grandmother made about, I don't know, 500,000 meals around this table. They never went to restaurants, and she cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner on a big old wood stove, cast iron wood stove. So after dinner every night, my mother and her sister Pauline would play duets, and my grandfather would play the mandolin. And my mother studied with Professor Marquesano. He was the organist at St. Michael's Church, and he had a lot of concerts, and my mother was often a soloist at those concerts. She had a beautiful soprano voice, and she played piano incredibly well. When my grandfather would bring home his small salary every week, she was in charge of the finances, and they would take walks on a Sunday with the family on William Street, and my grandmother would see this particular house at 54 William, and she loved it. And she would say to my grandfather, well, someday we're going to buy that house. And he probably laughed, because they couldn't afford it. And one day she announced that they were buying that house. She had scraped enough money together to put a down payment on that house. And that's where I was raised, at 54 William Street. As a child, I went to Skinner School, which was on State Street across from St. Stanislaus Church. It was a public school. My mother was the president of the Mothers Club, they called it then. And that was taken down when the highway went in. And so we went to, my sister and I, Carolyn, went to St. Boniface School. We were living on William Street at the time, and I just remember the man next door, Mr. Paparella, running around his yard and our yard with a big broom, swatting rats that were I guess, fleeing from all the construction. I remember that. And so William Street, again, was shortened right at the end of our block. And a lot of the stores and homes on Wooster Street were taken down because of the highway, and many of the residents there, who were mostly Italian, were very, very upset about this. And some people to this day are still very upset that this happened, because their neighborhood, their culture, their businesses, their homes were destroyed. And people had to leave Wooster Square. Now, it's certainly come back But those are the things I remember. You don't find too many of the original Italian families living in Wooster Square. It's not affordable anymore.